Excited to have a conversation today with Ken Gibbs. He's a social media guru, and when I thought about the topic of social media and the social media divide, and after having a conversation with him, I thought he'd be perfect for the topic of conversation. Today, we're going to be talking about not only the divide, but digging a little deeper and looking at the trust, trolls, and tracking as a part of the conversation, and not only the divided part, but then also the unity part, which goes right along perfectly with our digitally united conference. I want to introduce Ken, who's a guru with a wealth of experience. He's the head of Series Social at one of the most valuable and one of the most highly talked about companies in the world today, Amazon. And also, he was recently announced as a member of Adweek's first social media council, featuring 16 leaders from all over a number of industries, where he specifically is going to be a part of the organization, and where they're going to be representing roughly around $849 billion of revenue across the people who are a part of the social media council. So welcome, Ken. Great to have you, and I look forward to having a conversation with you.
Great, Clyde. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. And, as I mentioned earlier, when I was looking you up, and one of the first things that popped into my mind is, what's ahead of Series Social? In all my
Yeah,
years of marketing, almost 20 years, I've never heard that before. So I'd love to understand what you do, why you do it, and what makes you passionate about it.
got it. Yeah, so Head of Series Social is simply that I manage the team that manages the social strategy for all of the original series on the Prime Video service. We've actually recently had an internal reorg, so now we're more aligned in genre-based verticals. And as a result, I'm now the social lead for the action, thriller, and horror vertical. And the big difference there is that I'm no longer limited to just series, but I also include films as well in my remit.
So that's amazing, because as I think about the world of TV and television, Amazon Prime is really having a major impact. And you think about the social side of that, people are engaged. You think about early in the pandemic when people were starving for content. I think there was a bunch of content that was pushed across the world, and Amazon was one of the ones that really exploded. People who didn't have it already, they really leaned into it. When you're thinking about your remit and your charge, how did the pandemic impact you and the work that you were doing, and how did it change your day to day or impact your day to day with increased audience?
Got it. So I actually joined the team at Amazon in September of this year, and I think
Right.
it was a great time because, the pandemic put streaming services front and center, right? There were a lot of live events on TV that weren't happening anymore. People finally had the opportunity to, in some instances, discover that their Amazon Prime shopping account also gave them the Prime Video account as well. So what it really did was call attention to all the streamers. And from a marketing perspective, really, I think force us to double down on making sure that we're getting our campaigns in front of the right audiences and brand recognition, that they know it's on Prime Video and not any of the other services out there.
All right, great. So when I think about that, I often go back and think about, like, social media is very important to the conversation, because you can drive audience at the flip of a switch, right? You can send out a tweet, people be engaged and excited. But there's also a different side of that conversation where you think about cultural moments that are taking place in real time. And, typically on the marketing side, you schedule stuff and weeks and days in advance, and you prepare your marketing calendars. But, when there is social unrest, and there are many areas of the world where there are going to be changes and opportunities where you want to send something out, but it just doesn't make sense. How do you think about ways to communicate with your audience? And then also, how do you adjust your marketing strategy, thinking about people who are engaging, but there's something more important going on in the world?
Well, I think, that's why social listening is really important. Right. I think as a brand on social platforms, you must be empathetic to the climate of what's happening out there in society. People are on the social platforms to be social and not necessarily to be sold to, even though that's what we might be there to do. And you've got to think about how your message will be perceived, quite honestly, within that certain climate. If everyone is collectively mourning a tragedy, for example, is that the best time for you to actually tell them to watch something on your service that has nothing to do with it? It makes you seem tone deaf. And in an age when you're deepening your connection with consumers, that's definitely not how you want to appear.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely understand that. And we saw a huge a huge, I mean, absolutely just earth-shattering time in the summer of 2020 where essentially it was a racial awakening, with the tragic murder of George Floyd. I think social media was one of the areas that really drove awareness across the impactful moment. And, when you're thinking about, your social strategy or just in general, how you interact and work with social, how did that impact the way that you drive social activity? But then also, when you think about the way that corporations are interacting with people based on the impact of social, and specifically, I think about like Black Twitter, who can drive change at the corporate level. How do you think about that? How do you engage with it, and how did that impact your day to day?
Got it. So I actually wasn't here at Amazon, I think, during the height of the George Floyd moment, but obviously having been experienced and consulting people through, quite honestly, their social strategies during that moment in time, I think it's really that you've got to understand what the audience is looking for brands to say in that regard. Everyone wanted brands to at least acknowledge that racism was alive and present in America today, and a lot of brands did that. But I think the next question was, is it only going to be a cosmetic acknowledgement, or are you as a brand actually going to take this a step further, use your ways and means to affect change in the real world? And you saw that from many brands as well. It started on social, but it ended in the real world in an actual physical gesture or even donation in some instances.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. You saw a lot of the corporate entities donating billions of dollars. I mean, it just flooded the news wires, and you think about the impact of not only the dollars that are being spent, but then also the impact and change and holding people accountable with that. And one of the things around social and that social divide and unity piece is having the ability to broadcast a message as an individual that make a major impact on corporations, as somebody who does not have a blue check mark. So as you think about social and the change, how do you think about different ways to navigate and people interacting with corporations on a one-to-one basis, and how do they drive unity by having a voice as a singular person?
Well, I think from a corporate standpoint, that's why engagement and community management are important, right? You obviously can't respond to everyone who's in the
Mhm.
comments, but you've got to pick and choose who you're going to respond to, engage with, and why. But then there are also influencers in the community, right, that are relevant to the communities that you want to have your connections with, but also relevant to the brands, quite honestly, or your category from a brand perspective as well. And creating content and dialogue with those influencers can also help answer some of those questions that people in your comments may actually have.
Yeah, exciting. And you talk about influencers, and something that really comes to mind as a part of this conversation are trolls. Trolls are, I think, important to the ecosystem. In our survey, I was very surprised at the response. 60% of the people really said that they don't mind them; they just keep scrolling, and it doesn't really make a big impact. I was very surprised at that. And we saw recently, I think earlier this year, how trolls or people who can have major influence with social media, thinking about Wall Street Bets and the Reddit audience and how they impacted and influenced business. Uh, what are your thoughts on that? And how do you see the future changing based on what we saw earlier this year in the financial markets?
It's interesting, right? I think we're close to the end of the era of the troll, right?
Really?
Because we're moving away from the timeline and we're moving more to messages, groups on Facebook, DMs taking over as the primary communication on platforms. Think about Snapchat, right? Like
Mhm.
Snapchat isn't a timeline. It's the platform that's embraced by the majority of the youth who are coming up. I forget kind of what you call that generation at the moment, but that's not a timeline-driven platform, right? It's a message-driven platform. Think about where Facebook is moving things in terms of WhatsApp and unifying the messages from WhatsApp, Messenger, and Instagram as well, right? The troll can't penetrate that, right? And
Mhm.
then the last thing I'd say is the current audio craze that you're seeing with Clubhouse and Twitter Spaces, right? Both of those, again, take you away from the dialogue and bring you much closer to broadcast again, right? Because it's basically you've got speakers who are on this virtual stage, and everyone else who is listening to this audio conversation can only do just that, just listen, right? You can't comment, you can't say anything unless they pull you up on stage. So, and I think, that's a lot of the trolling behavior, quite honestly, has steered people towards platforms in which they can have more control over conversations that they're trying to have using technology.
Wow, yeah, I've been watching Clubhouse closely and Twitter jumping in the game with their service, and even diving a bit deeper where you talk about the engagement and owning the conversation, launching subscription services on social where you really own the conversation. You think about the tracking side or the investment side from a marketing perspective of buying ads. As you lean into that and subscription comes into play, you have more ownership of the messaging, the conversation. As you see that, do you think that's the future of social media, having more of an ownership, one-to-one conversations, and really diving into it where advertising and big businesses, they don't really have as much of a say in the conversation?
Yeah. I don't think advertising and big businesses will never have as much of a say. I think they got a good foothold there, but I do think disruption is here, right? And I think what you're seeing now through Cameo and some other things like their OnlyFans and some others, but it's the gig economy kind of that's in a total digital virtual space as well, right? And so you're seeing that with Cameo's got a great example, but you need a little bit of celebrity there, right? I think with operations like Clubhouse, for example, or OnlyFans, you're seeing just the tip of the iceberg. Imagine on Clubhouse right now if we were doing this as a speaker series or a room, and we're just asking everyone for $1 to come in, right? All of a sudden, with the right people who are being a part of this, there's a lot of money to be made, right, at a relatively low lift. So I
Hmm.
think we're just really at the beginning of the subscriptions. We're calling it subscriptions, but when you think about that and also how people are becoming more protective over their data, right? I think every individual looking at their own data and then also as a content creator, their followers, their audiences that they're building up on these platforms, they'll be faced with increasingly more ways to monetize them. And that won't rely on traditional methods like advertisement.
So the monetization piece is interesting because, as a marketer and been in the marketing space for many years, you think about, 50% of your budget was wasted. You just didn't know which 50%. So with the higher level of tracking, you can be more strategic and targeting. As you think through the process of, how social media will interact and change over time, what does the future look like? I know you touched on audio, but what does the future look like, let's say 10 years from now? Is social media still a thing? Or does it evolve?
It's definitely evolving, right? I mean, and again, we're really just at the first stages, and I think that's evidenced by the shift from the timeline to the DM. People have fully embraced the ability to communicate with whoever they want, wherever they want, however, whether it's video or audio only, right? That's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. We've even seen that spin up larger communities that are somewhat existing in the shadows, like your Parler or what have you, right? So people are embracing communication over technology, but I do think the value of the social network, so to speak, will continue to shift, right? I always liken social networks to clubs in New York City, right? If it's a popular club at one point, we're all going to it, but the people who are coming up after us, they don't want to go to the club that their father's at, right? And it will be somewhat similar from a social networking perspective. What will be the platforms that will kind of gain the attention of the younger audiences?
All right, yeah, absolutely. I think that hits the nail on the head. And one of the things I want to leave you with and prepare to close this out with just a moment to just share anything else that you'd like the audience to know around your space in the social media world and where you see us going.
Got it. Well, you know what? I would say the one thing that was special about this year that we'll probably see more of in the future as people continue to just embrace all the possibilities that this technology brings to us is, increasingly more physical mobilizations that originate from social conversations, right? Like that's essentially what happened on January 6th. The chatter betrayed and revealed that there would be an attack, but we were in an environment where people weren't heeding those warnings, right? So a completely virtual conversation, people, many of which who had never met before physically, allowed them to organize, rendezvous at a destination, and carry out an attack that was able to overwhelm a police force, right? I think the possibility of that happening, for better or for worse, peaceful and non-peaceful protests, I think we'll see a lot more of that as future generations, again, just embrace the opportunity to communicate and share ideas and find like-mindedness.
Wow, Ken. So thanks for sharing that. It's been a great conversation, and for those of us out there, we really enjoyed your time, and we'd like to continue the conversation, keep it going.
Perfect. I've enjoyed this, Clyde. Thank you and take on me for having me.
Absolutely.